All right, guys, welcome back to this week's episode of Firepunk Fridays. It's good to be with you guys again, and Levon and I are going to chat about just some random things this week. Kind of have, I don't know, 4 or 5 different things we're wanting to talk about. I thought I'd let you guys know that we do have the Firepunk Friday in a podcast format now. It is available on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple, whatever, Apple
Something Apple.
Podcasts. I don't Apple well, so. But so for those of you that like it in audio form and don't want to watch it on YouTube, it is available there. And so check that out. But going into this week, we kind of have a short week for us. We had, the 4th obviously on Monday. And then for our family, we're doing camping on Friday. So it makes it for a quick 3-day week, kind of a lot of stuff crammed into a week. Definitely makes
Goes
it a
by
little bit,
fast.
yeah,
Yep.
it makes it tough to get all of our stuff done. But
About the time you get your Monday out of the way on a Tuesday, and then you've got one more day until you got to pack up and roll out of here. So,
And then to top it all off, you had last week to catch up from. So
yep,
you were out of the office a good bit
2
of the
days.
week doing training at Bosch.
Yeah, I went up to visit Bosch North American Engineering. Did some training with the new ECMs and the power boxes. It's all systems that we've been buying through Exergy Performance. They've been setting it up. Their engineers generally do the base layouts, and then they turn it over into a setup that I can play with. And it's been very successful for us to use that platform. And I wanted to get a deeper understanding of how the programming works on the backside of it. And there's a lot of things to learn when it comes to a platform like that, but it is really cool to go in a facility like that and see all the possibilities and realize how much we're just scratching the surface of what those systems are really capable of.
Yeah. What you were telling me a little bit about the size, how big Bosch is. That
Yeah.
we always knew as a big company, and like you see Bosch on a little bit of anything, whether
Right.
it's fuel injection or whatever. But tell me, how many people did you say they employ, and how many
Yeah.
locations they have?
I think they have 440,000 employees over 1,100 locations.
That's crazy.
And they're just a monster. I mean, Bosch does such a wide range of things. Whether they're building modules, they got modules in the Corvette C8R race car. They've got them in F1 cars. They've got their modules in all kinds of stuff. Then they still make alternator starters, fuel injectors, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of those parts and pieces are manufactured in Mexico or Czechoslovakia. So they've just got a wide range of the projects that they work on there in the engineering department, because different OEs or teams will hire them to develop a product for their specific application, and so they get to do all the testing in house and get it dialed in before they turn it over to the OEs.
Mm-hmm. So you said some of the stuff felt like a little bit over your head, but
A lot.
I mean,
Yeah.
what were some of the things you took away from last week that you think you can? I mean, I guess what did you come away from last week learning, and what can you make our trucks do better? Yeah.
Right. Well, the biggest thing that I learned is I understand how the ECM's laid out, and you understand how there's inputs coming in on the left and outputs coming out on the right, and we learned all the definitions, how you can go back through the ECM schematic and see all the different definitions that it looks for, and how I can search for it in the ECM when I'm programming, and how I can make one thing reference another. I understand CAN communications better. CAN ID, your big endian versus little endian, and your bits and your bytes. Understanding that stuff. I mean, it's an advanced advanced system that normally the end user doesn't have to be familiar with that stuff, and I've not really dug into it before that. I had a general understanding of it, but that's what I came away with, a lot better understanding that if I want to go into the PBX system of the S10 and change some of the calculations, I want to add a pulse width modulation to my spool jet, or if I want to add a time-based fueling program, I've figured out how to take the input and add a bunch of math channels into it where you can make it do what you want.
Pretty much the goal was for us to try to become a little bit more independent, and then also be able to provide some customer support to our
Right.
customers without having to rely on Exergy quite as much. It
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. When you start getting a lot of these systems out there and it's all dependent on one company or one business to
Yeah.
do it all, it becomes pretty,
It's
whatever,
just
demanding.
cumbersome,
Yeah.
yeah, because everybody relies on one person, and we're just trying to uh, learn as much as we can so we can do more of that stuff in house without relying on having to call Exergy anytime I need a change made in the base programming. And then we also learned about some of the math channels we could do. Say with the S10, I could take the accelerometer and convert the accelerometer, the G meter to feet per second, then feet per second to distance, and now I can measure distance based on how much G's of acceleration we're using. Then now I can, latch at 60 feet to see from the length of time that it took to let off the trans brake button and go 60 feet. And then at length of time to go 330 feet, length of time to go 660 feet. And I can basically print a timesheet off the accelerometer that can pop up on the screen as you're racing. So if you do some backcountry racing or you've got no time, we can get a really good idea of what your time is going to be based on the accelerometer.
Cool. Yeah, sounds like a lot of stuff that definitely would fly straight over my head, but definitely helps to know a lot of that stuff. And yeah, sounds like it was
Yeah.
a good time.
Well, they
So,
say if you have a race car, fast race car, and you don't know why, and then it's not going to be fast for long. So the
mhm.
Bosch gives you all that information. It's the same thing with the Motec that a lot of guys are running a full standalone system that gives you the end user full capability of looking at every data system, all the information. Now you can see why your race car's fast or why it's slow, and then you know what changes you need to make.
Yep. Cool. Yep. Well, that sounds like a good time. Little bit of news that dropped yesterday. Hot Shot Secret announced that they're merging with Gold Eagle Company, and that's pretty exciting. We've kind of known this was in the works for a little while, and Kyle's been pretty excited about it because um, it just gives them a whole lot of a bigger company to work together
Right.
with. So pretty much, from my understanding, LSI, which Lubrication Specialties Incorporated, which is the parent company of Hot Shot Secret, they are still going to run as an independent company just the way that they are. There's no plans for changing manufacturing or anything of that sort. But really, they're just going to be able to work together and share strengths with each other and try to um, yeah,
Right.
it gives
That's
them buying power. It gives them Gold Eagle's been in business for 90 years and four
right.
generations. So there's a lot bigger knowledge base for them to tap into. So that's pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, that's the way I understand is Gold Eagle has taken some very well known products like Stable. They take a product like that and they purchase the brand and then they use their they have what, 1 million square foot facility
Yeah.
in Chicago, and then they can bottle it and have an awesome marketing department that distribute this worldwide. And so they are really good at marketing and distributing. And one of the things that Gold Eagle was looking for was more R&D, in-house R&D, and that was something that Lubrication Specialties was beating everybody in the marketplace with, was being able to do the Powered by Science and all the lab R&D they do in-house. And Gold Eagle wanted to tap into that resource, and Hot Shots was really looking at better bottling lines, and it really was kind of a match that works out well because now that Gold Eagle will be able to help Hot Shots get a lot of their products that they already have bottled in a more efficient manner,
Right.
and LSI can help Gold Eagle with R&D projects that they've been working on.
Right. And if you just look at like some of the distributors, Gold Eagle's been working with a lot more and a lot bigger scale
Right.
on distributor stuff. So
Yeah.
that's good for Hot Shots to be able to, get the product in more places. Makes it good for everyone because it's easier to get a hold of and everything. So definitely exciting news for them over there. We're excited for them, and we're glad to hear that that all is finalized and rolling. But yeah, we look forward to keep working with Hot Shots. We appreciate everything they do for us, and it's been I don't know, like before we got into racing and stuff, I kind of had my vision of what sponsorship looks like, and
Right.
I feel like this is pretty different from a lot of sponsorships from the standpoint of like they almost feel like family.
Right. Yep.
Kyle's almost at every race. Uh, get to know him really well, and just I think what they've done for us as diesel racers as a whole, being there with the customer support
Right.
and how much they stress. I mean, they'll tell anybody to call them and talk about their oil needs and like, let's get you an oil analysis, and they'll spend time with each customer personally.
They're problem solvers.
Right. They're problem solvers.
They want to take problems in the industry, develop a product to fix it, and deliver it to the masses.
Mhm.
And that's their customer support. I mean, it's refreshing to have a company that comes out, goes to all the races, supports them all, and gives back to the industry they're selling to. They're not just there making commodity products and trying to sell you snake oil.
Right.
That they want to sell you products that fix problems.
Well, and I was just listening to Two Guys Garage podcast recently that Chris Gabrelchek was on. He's the owner of LSI. And one of the things he said on there that really kind of stuck out to me is most people are focusing on getting an additive out there that they can, make a claim or something, but yet they're just trying to be competitive and put the least amount of expensive product that they can to be competitive and, still be able to market it. Whereas their approach is, I want to fix your problem and it's going to cost me what it costs me, and then I will figure out how to sell it.
Right.
So it's kind of a backwards mentality. Like they're going to use all the best. They don't really care what it costs. And even if their profit margins aren't as high, they want to sell the best of the best, and they want to solve a lot of problems. So that was pretty cool. If anybody's interested in that, that was a pretty decent episode on Two Guys Garage. I've listened to Chris talk about some of that stuff, but we could go down oil rabbit trails for a while.
There's a lot of rabbit trails there, but it is good. It's good to educate yourself on what you're putting in your vehicle, because a lot of times, until you actually educate yourself, it really is. Everybody says that, oh, this is the best. This is the best. There are a lot of good products out there, but I like to support Hot Shots simply for the fact that they support us in the diesel industry, and I do believe that they have some of the best products on the market.
Yep. Well, month of July, we don't have a pro mod vehicle to race, so it's a pretty laid back month with not much to do, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a laid back month in terms of racing, but it's not a laid back month. We've still got with July 4th, and we've got camping, and we've got the Steam Threshers parade coming up at Rocky Top.
Right. So that's what I was leading into with the Steam Threshers next weekend. That's always a highlight for us. Mm-hmm. This is, I don't know, is it going to be the fourth year? I think it's fourth year that we have the tractor ride.
Yeah, fourth or fifth.
Yeah, so it started out as the farmers stopping by on their tractor ride. And I think the first year was maybe 20 or 30 tractors. And Steam Threshers brought some hot dogs and chip bags and water bottles out for the farmers to have lunch.
Right.
And we said, if we're going to do this, let's do this right. Let's do it Firepunk style. And we said the next year, we'd love to have them back, but we'd like to cook lunch for them. So we did that, and it's grown into, what did we have last year? I think 75 tractors, roughly.
I think there was 75 or 80 of them.
We'll completely fill the parking lot full of tractors.
Well, we should back up for the people that aren't familiar with the Steam Thresher Show in Plain City. That is something that's been going. Miami Valley Steam Threshers Association hosts a Steam Thresher Show in Plain City the last, I don't know,
longer than I can remember.
And every year they feature a different brand of tractor. It's either, Deere, Farmall, Oliver, you name it. And then everybody will bring their restored tractors or not restored tractors, and they put them on display. And so everybody's in Plain City anyway. And Friday, for fun, they take the farmers on a 10-mile loop through the country, and we stopping by the shop for lunch. So we did ribs and chicken, and that seemed to be a big hit. So we'll probably be doing a bunch of ribs and chicken again this year. And the farmers like it. It's a big community event. It's fun to get out all the farmers together, and they're having a good time driving their old tractors through the country, and then we get to stop and have some good fellowship for lunch.
Yeah, so if you're local, make sure you check that out. Or if you're not local and you have a tractor and you enjoy hanging out with other farmers and tractors and eating good food, make sure you check out the Steam Threshers or hit us up for details.
Yeah,
if you
there's
wanna,
plenty of people that
if you want to come out and enjoy the tractor ride. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you guys. So I believe you do need to sign up so that they have a rough idea of how
Right.
many people there's going to be. But everyone's welcome with that. And then, so that's Friday. Friday evening is the parade, which I don't know if we're going to participate in that or not, but we have in years past. It depends a little bit, I guess, how crazy our day is and if we can throw a float of some sort together,
Right.
whether we do that or not. But then we're also we have our apparel trailer at the show all weekend. And then Saturday evening, there is a truck and tractor pull, and we host the truck class. So there's not much of a chance for people to sled pull their street trucks because of turbo restrictions. And so we kind of do a Firepunk sled pull where it's pretty much, if you have a street truck, kind of anything goes.
Yeah,
And we have a ton of fun with that.
We wanted to make it a rule to where I can have, like, my quad cab has compound turbos on it, and where can you go and sled pull it? You're pretty much pulling with the super stock trucks if you want to compete anywhere, and that just doesn't work to take a street truck that has that's not geared correctly to really go hook to it. And so we made it kind of an invitational, limited to 30 trucks, and you have to sign up to get in, and first 30 guys to show up. So I'm excited this year. I think there's Josh McCormick and David Petrick are bringing their trucks up. A lot of guys will show up and swing for the fence because not often you can have twin turbos and nitrous and let it all hang out and put on a show for the people. But it's always a good time.
Yeah, but it is interesting to see. Like, I mean, last year, we had the quad cab and Cody's pulled in years past, but even like the best of our street trucks going up against a well set up work stock it was work stock. Yep. So a well set up, properly geared sled truck, still really hard to beat.
Right. Yeah,
So
Cody had his big compounds plus a couple kits of nitrous. He was probably making 1,900 horsepower and had an awesome hook. Got second place to a 1,300 horsepower work stock truck or whatever. It probably wasn't work stock that night, but I think they were running around 1,300 horsepower, but it was 456 geared, and the final drive ratio was correct. And on Cody's truck, he was 373 geared, so he was blazing the tires the whole time. Had plenty of power, but it never got 1-to-1 with the tire, and I think that really makes a difference. So horsepower is not king when it comes to sled pulling. You got to have your setup first, and then you add your horsepower later.
Yeah, and it's a ton of fun. I mean, a lot of locals that don't ever hook their truck will go in there, once a year. I remember, I mean, back in our early truck days, that was a big highlight for us, just going in there, hooking our trucks, whether were competitive or not.
It's just in front of all the locals, and it's a good time.
It's a small little track under a bunch of oak trees and a bunch of people on lawn chairs sitting around, good old brush pull.
Yep.
So we have a lot of fun with that, and looking forward to that next weekend. So what is it? 2 weeks later is going into Rocky Top, right?
There's 1 weekend in between?
Yeah.
In between the Steam Show and Rocky Top. Rocky Top should be a great event. It always is. It's in Crossville, Tennessee. We always have a lot of racers come out to it. It's a great racetrack, and usually it's midsummer where most everybody's got their stuff, kind of the bugs shaken out of it, and there's a lot of people that go fast at Rocky Top. It's also a time that a lot of people tear stuff up. I don't know. We've had a couple rough times at Rocky Top. Yeah. But it usually comes where you finally got stuff ironed out, and then you're leaning on it, and that's where you tear stuff up.
It's a really unique racetrack, and it's probably one of my favorite tracks. I say that about a couple of tracks, I think, but just the way it's got the creek run in the middle with the bridge and everything. It's got that really small 8th mile track feel. It's an updated facility. It's got a good track surface and a nice tower and a lot of concrete in the parking area. So that always makes it nice for racers, just, a nice facility like that. And yet it's not a big sprawling compound.
Right.
And we have a good time there. But in the terms of tearing things up, I hope we got all of that done last year, because last year it was pretty ugly. I mean, it started during the day. Like, the race day was pretty brutal on race vehicles. There was a couple guys that blew up engines, and there was a certain little beamer that went into the wall. And
then we start off Friday. Landon's truck broke. Something on the way. He was towing.
He had a transmission issue of some sort, I'm pretty sure.
I think he spun the pump bushing out of the pump So they're just cruising down the road, and all of a sudden developed a trans leak, and it spun the pump bushing out of the pump. And so he was sitting beside the road a couple hours away, and he had the quad cab on the trailer. I think.
No, he had
Oh
Blake bring
yeah.
the quad cab.
No,
down.
he was driving his.
He
truck.
was almost down. Somebody
Yep.
ended up picking him up and bringing him on down.
Yep.
And then
well, we left from the track and went back and
Right.
got him. And then we called our friend Blake Miller, lives right up the road from the shop. He used to race 770, and he came and got the quad cab got my gooseneck and threw the quad cab on it and headed down there. And when he gets to Crossville, the big charger on the quad cab was locked up tight. Kind of a freak thing. We've towed trucks on trailers for a long time with air filters on them, never had a problem. But apparently the turbo started spinning without oil on the way down there and seized the turbo. So Landon's truck was broke with a trans, and the quad cab locked up the turbo. So we stole the big charger off of Landon's truck and put it on the quad cab, and Landon went and raced 670 with the quad cab. So we started with that, and then that was the night that it was Saturday night that Rod ended up wrecking my scooter and breaking 9 bones. There was another guy in a Razor doing donuts in the parking lot after we went to bed that ended up flipping, and I think he cut his head open or something like that.
He got an ambulance ride as well. I'm not sure how bad those damages were, but we were all, as much as we liked Rocky Top, we all knew it was time to get out of there last year because it just, the longer it went, the worse it got. Yep. But
everything was broken.
So hopefully we got all of that out of the way and we can go back and have some fun this year. But definitely going to be some things to watch for. I know Friday night with the grudge match stuff, there's been a decent bit of chatter. Ryan will have his car there with the new 4-link.
Yep.
And
he'll have so many holes in the back.
Yeah,
he'll for sure not get it right.
He won't know what to do with it all.
I'm really hoping to see that car make some passes because Rocky Top usually has a tight track Friday night, and on a radial, his car should get down. If he gets it back in time to get the 4-link set up, be fun to make that car. So watch that car make some laps.
I haven't seen. Do you know if they're doing the gas versus diesel shootout this year?
I don't know, but they have the last couple years.
Last year we had a lot of fun with that. There was 4 of us with diesels, and they brought 4 gas cars in, and we had a really fun race.
They ended up winning.
Yeah, we did win that last year, I do believe. So that was a lot of fun. Racing under the lights is always a good time. Lining up against vehicles that you're not used to lining up against is a lot of fun.
I don't know. Those are some of the best races ever. You get a bunch of fast gas cars. If you can go out there and watching a diesel win and go rounds against cars that have been on the track for a long time, it's rewarding, to finally be at a place where we can go to some events like that, mix it up with the gas cars and win some races. That's fun.
They always do a good job there too of making sure there's action for the crowd. They'll bring the stunt bikes in. Those are a lot of fun to watch. Those guys are absolutely crazy. But they'll have them running up and down the track during track prep times or down times or whatever. And then usually they have a concert as well, either Friday or Saturday night. I think it's usually Saturday night that they'll do that after the races. So if you're looking for an ODSS race to come to, Crossville is definitely a good place to come to, and we're looking forward to it.
It's the last weekend of July.
Yeah. I know there's a number of trucks, vehicles, I should say, that are coming with either showing up with upgrades or in the near future. Like I know Turbo Tom, he tore up or he bent his AAM axle pretty good at UCC. So he's trying to get a 9-inch together in time to go to Rocky Top. Nathan Wheeler I think he's getting the Motec before Rocky Top. I know he's on track to doing that, but I think Nathan Wheeler and Tyler Burkhart are supposed to do some grudge racing Friday night. They were at least chattering on the internet about it. I'm not sure if
that's some Cummins on Duramax action.
I don't know if that's all all talk or if they're actually going to do it. But looking forward to see the DHD truck. I know they're putting a Neil Chance converter in it, and pretty excited to see them get that all figured out. Hopefully that's going to be the ticket for their next 2/10 to get shaved off their time. But learning more and more that converters are a big deal, and to get the the RPM flash and everything
Right.
right, and make to where your drop going to lockup isn't too violent, makes a really big difference.
Yeah, because you can get it to flash into stall and get about a 95% converter efficiency before lockup. The change in RPM isn't near as radical when you bring lockup in. But if you're running like a 75 to 80% efficiency and then bring lockup in, you're a lot more likely to upset the tire and be dart looking at the wall when you bring lockup in.
Yeah. And then also in Pro Street, I know Derek is planning to come out and hopefully set Pro Street on fire.
Yep.
He's been chomping at the bit because at Wagglers he was not at Pro Street weight,
Right.
so he was running Pro Mod, but I think he plans to be at Pro Street and would really like to reset those records and bury him a good bit from where they're at. I know they went through his engine and everything after UCC with the issues that they had, so he'll be back fresh and ready to go.
And I think you're going to do a grudge race with Ben Shetty, maybe.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, he talked about lining back up with Ben and just making sure that Ben needed to make sure that he can prove that he's still daddy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ben has, he tore the car up at UCC as well, but before that, he was having, personal best weekend.
Yeah.
So they've definitely come on something with suspension where they're, on the track to making good headways with that car. So it's going to be fun to see if he can build on that and maybe get that thing into the teens at Rocky Top. I mean, Rocky Top is usually, especially Friday night, like you've usually got
go time.
You've got good track and good air, and it's a good place to go fast. So, and then the Stainless crew, they just got their feet wet at UCC, and I expect them to, keep coming out and running better with that car. So should be a lot of fun stuff to happen there.
Ziegler, his truck is hoping to be back on the track for Rocky Top as well. He pulled the truck apart, or pulled the trans out yesterday after UCC. He kept the truck together because he went down for a TV shoot and just got back from that. And when he pulled the rear drive shaft out, couldn't get the rear drive shaft out. And turns out the output shaft coming out of the SCS gearbox has like almost a full twist on it. So pretty close to
full spline.
Full spline twist, yeah. And so pretty close to we came to whacking that transfer case shaft in half on that dyno hit.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that we've never twisted that on the drag strip.
Yeah.
It's never been a problem.
I know he called us yesterday trying to get the drive shaft out, and Cody's like, dude, like, you've got to tap on it, like, firmly, but it comes out. It's not that big a deal. Well, come to figure out it was probably a bigger deal than we thought, because that thing had a pretty hard twist in it.
So we've got to get parts coming for that, try to get that fixed. And he was going to pull the motor, get it to D&J, and have them fix the tulip valves from that nitrous backfire that we had on Friday. Even though things sounded healthy, once a valve is tuliped, it's just going to keep getting worse with heat, and you don't want to take a chance. Right now, it's easy to fix, and if you wait until a valve breaks, and then it costs you a lot of money. So I think Drew wanted to do a teardown on the motor after that big dyno hit, just to see what the bearings look like, what the pistons look like, just to video it, see what it looks like. Hopefully be able to put it right back together. I know he did a burnout for the TV show down there, and everything was running good. So hopefully it shouldn't take much to freshen that back up and make it ready to swing for the fence once we get the chassis stuff ironed out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, definitely looks like there's a lot of stuff to look forward to at Rocky Top, and should be a good time there. I think we pretty much covered our bases with that. Let's take just a little bit of time. I had one of our subscribers message me asking about horsepower recipes. At first I was like, it's kind of feels like something we talk about all the time, but it is one of those things where we take a lot of phone calls about it, and I think that's probably why it feels so repetitious to us. But yet, I mean, there is a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. Right. So let's just start kind of down low. Let's start at 500 horsepower. So most of this, I guess we can kind of incorporate newer vehicles with the older trucks as well. But I mean, 500 horsepower is pretty basic. You really, in an older truck that has a 48 RE in it, you're going to want a built transmission. Probably like our street track unit would be a good direction.
I mean, anything over 450 horsepower, you really should have a billet input shaft. I mean, we've seen the stock input shaft survive at 500 if you're driving it nice, but it really just takes one good shock load the wrong way and you got a broken input shaft. So our Towmaster transmission still has stock shafts. We recommend that for stock trucks with very minor updates. But if you've got an '06 truck with EFI on it, everybody's like, yeah, I got a stock truck. Well, if you have a hot tune on your EFI, it can make 510, 515 horsepower and 1,000 foot-pounds of torque, and that's enough to break your stock input shaft. So you always have to use your judgment. But with 500 horsepower, it's really not that hard to make it. Any stock 2004 and a half and to even newer truck, 2004 and a half to 0759, those trucks make 500, completely stock with just programming. And
tune and transmission, you're pretty much at 500 horsepower.
Yeah. You can do the 500 with the stock transmission, but it won't last long.
Yeah.
Because your torque converter, the lockup clutch does not like 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Now, that's a peak horsepower. That's not a sustained horsepower, because there's a big difference between getting on the dyno and making 500 horsepower or doing a 12-second wide-open throttle blast down the on-ramp, getting on the highway, as opposed it is to making 500 horsepower, towing 26,000 pounds over Fancy Gap. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different ball game. And a whole different recommended parts than it is just stock truck with tuning. Yeah. Because you'll melt a hole in a piston if you try to use 500 horsepower towing heavy over Fancy Gap with stock turbo and stock injectors and all that stuff. So
you've got injectors maxed out on pulse width, and you've got turbos that are barely pushing enough air, and definitely not something you want to tow around with a lot. That kind of setup. So. Jump up to 600 horsepower. I mean, what's the first limiting factor on, factory parts, turbo or injectors or what?
The turbo, most of the time, if you do a turbo upgrade on a otherwise stock fuel system, you can get high 500s out of it, 570 to 595. I mean, we've hit 600 with stock fuel. If you've got a lot of air, if you just do a set of compounds, we've seen over 600. But with a single turbo, generally, you put a 63, a Fleece Cheetah Charger on there, or a Tater Build, or a Stealth, a stock appearing turbo of sorts, you're going to see 565, 570 on a max effort tune on stock fuel with a stock appearing turbo upgrade. And those, so you got a good bang for the buck, and at 500 horsepower now you got more airflow, and so you're not going to get as hot. So that's always good. But really for 600 horsepower, I'd like to see if you put 100 horsepower injectors in it with stock CP3 and a nice turbo upgrade, you can make a solid 600 horsepower on a stock CP3 without much injector. The 100 horsepower injectors can still be tuned really clean. Anytime you go bigger on injectors, you increase your haze at lower fuel quantities because the hole's physically bigger. Yes, you can tune a lot of it out, but not all. If you really need to be clean, you're not going to have an injector as clean as a stock injector because it's just lower fuel quantities. So that really comes down to if you want 600 horsepower, stay smaller on the injectors, 100 horsepower injectors. And a set of compounds, you could have a great towing setup that would tow well with 450 horsepower continuous and still be able to make 600 peak when you're beating on it, and it be relatively clean and a good driving setup.
Yeah. So for 600 horsepower, you probably want to have a lift pump on it. A head studs would become a really good idea at that point. You could probably still get by without it, but it would probably not be the greatest of ideas.
I ran my quad cab at 585 horsepower. It was a complete stock fuel system with an S300 on it. Made 585 to the tire, and I ran it that way for 95,000 miles with stock head bolts, making 50 pounds of boost. And when I pulled my head studs out one at a time, there was 3 or 4 of them that were bubbling up coolant and oil, and they were all rusted to where I could tell that I was right on the edge of exchanging fluids in my head gasket. So if you're in the high 500s, it's a good idea to have head studs. I would say once you put a turbo on it, put head studs on it.
Yep. So jumping up to 700 horsepower. So now you've got a transmission, you've got head studs, lift pump, you've got upgraded injectors, and obviously, I mean, to make 600, you're going to need some kind of a turbo on it. But if somebody wants to make 700 horsepower, let's talk turbos a little bit. What's a good option for somebody that needs to be daily driving and towing with it, and yet wants to make 700 horsepower? Like, what'd be your first choice on what type of
on
turbo?
a single
I mean,
turbo for 700 horsepower. I mean, honestly, that this is a wide range, because me towing here in Plain City where it's flat, and then I head out on 70 West, it's flat, as opposed to me talking to somebody that's in the hills over in Pennsylvania or out west. It's a little different. Around here, I can put a 464 8390 second gen swap on a third gen truck, 5.9, and it spools really nice. It still tows good. You'll have to turn overdrive off, keep your RPMs around 1800 to 2000. You can't lug it at 1400 RPM like you can a stock turbo. But that turbo will drive nice. It's very strong, and it'll easily support 700 horsepower. We had a 10 mil stroker pump, 100 horsepower injectors, and a 464 maxed out, made 779 on an 05 truck. And he could run 770 index with it. He could tow a gooseneck down to Tennessee if he wanted to with a truck on it. He could daily drive it without a lot of smoke output. It was a well-rounded setup. I would say,
would you pick that turbo over a stock appearing turbo?
For the durability aspect, yes. Now, I know like Ryan Riddle's truck is a good prime example. He's run a 67 stock appearing. And I would say it has better has better drivability than a 464 does, just because it's got bigger turbine flow. But the stock appearing has a little better drivability, but the S400 would have better turbine flow. So when you're racing, the S400 is going to be a better scenario. You're not going to run as hot, and it's going to be more durable because the bearings are bigger, the shaft is bigger. But at 700 horsepower, a stock appearing turbo really is a pretty good bang for the buck, because you can pop one of those turbos on there for the $1,500 range, $1,500 to $1,800, depending which one you're buying, and you don't have to change your turbo feeds, turbo drains, downpipe, intake pipe, none of that stuff. It just bolts on. Whereas if you're doing a second gen swap, you're going to spend $3,000 doing it. It's almost double the money to do a second gen, because you got to change your downpipe, charge air pipe, intake.
That's one thing that is really nice with the stock appearing stuff. It's very budget friendly because you're not changing a lot of different stuff. It's a lot quicker to install. It's a factory replacement. So that part of it's pretty nice and appealing. So let's talk twin turbos a little bit. So obviously going from 700 to 800, like you're getting to the point where I would like to have twins. But some of the things that we run into with twin turbos on a stock engine, the beauty of twins is the drivability is really good. They spool quick. The downside is they make a ton of torque, and a ton of torque, once you get up closer to 1,000 horsepower, has a tendency to shorten rods and do bad things to stock engine. So like if somebody wants to run twins in that 800 to 900 horsepower range, what are some things they should do to, help protect themselves, and some things they shouldn't do with them?
Well, the biggest thing with compounds, you run more boost. We for sure want ARP 625s in it to keep it from stretching the head studs and blowing the head gasket. But most of the torque can be tuned out by keeping timing and rail pressure conservative till 3,000 RPM. And then you can start ramping in and make your power up high. You just want it, if you go full throttle and goes to 3,800 RPM, then brings overdrive in, knocks it down to 2,700 RPM. If you've got timing and rail pressure in it at lower RPM, it's going to make a ton of torque, and that's where you break a rod in that 1,000 horsepower range. So compounds really give you the best of both worlds, because they have the manifold charger that's reasonably sized, that spools good. Then you got the big charger that's thumping in good clean air for the top end power, and you have just a much better mid range. But when it comes to power levels, I think it's best to go back and look at whether you make 700 horsepower, 900 horsepower, or 1200 horsepower. To do those 3 power levels, you have to buy a CP3, you have to buy an injector, and you have to buy a turbo.
Mm-hmm.
So you're buying those 3 main power components, and the price difference between a 10 mil, 12 mil, and 14 mil pump are a couple $100, $800 difference between those 3. And then the difference between a 100 horsepower injector and a 100% injector is a couple $100. And then the difference between 100% and 200% injectors is maybe $1,000 difference. So overall, you're talking maybe a $2,500 spread. The difference between making 700 horsepower worth of fuel and air as opposed to 1,200 horsepower fuel and air if you're doing it all with a single turbo. So set your end goal. Say my peak power goal is 1,100. Then buy one injector for that power goal, one turbo for that power goal, and one CP3 for that power goal. Yeah. I see so many guys go, I want 600, and they get 600. Then the next year they're like, I want 700, right? And then they get 700, and they end up 5 years down the road, they end up 1,000 horsepower, but they've spent their money over 5 times. And most people don't know their power goal, but I like to, before I sell them parts, have that conversation. What is your peak power goal? Like what? This would be perfect.
Okay. I can't afford everything to do 1,000 horsepower right now, but I know I want 1,000 horsepower. I can afford 750 right now. Right. So you can buy those 100% injectors and you can tune them back. You can buy that 12 millimeter or 12 mil CP3 and you can pull it back. And then, you might still be running on that stock appearing turbo right now, and that's just what you're going to make.
Right.
But once you have the money for your ARP 625s and your turbo, then it's simply a matter of a tune change and turbo, and you're ready to party rather than having to go back and do it all over again with your fuel system. So that's the beauty of the common rail is you can oversize to a certain extent and be just fine tuning it back.
It's a little difficult if you want to end up at 2,000 horsepower.
You don't want to go that crazy.
You don't necessarily want to buy 400% overs and a 14 mil and run your stock turbo for a year or two. There's boundaries that I say that, but it's still setting that final goal to say, once I've gotten this list of parts, I can hit this power, and that's what I'll be happy with. But in the grand scheme of things, compounds versus single turbo, peak power, you can almost always make your peak power goal with a single turbo. You never have to have compounds to make your power goal. The compounds just give you drivability and better ability to make that 1,200 horsepower and still hook a trailer and tow it over the mountains. Because you can put a single 475 on it and make in the 1100s, and you can still tow a trailer.
Yeah.
Can you do it awesome? If you ask Josh McCormick, you can tow with a single 88 millimeter GT55. Yes, I can tow with any turbo you want. Just bolt a turbo on, I'll get the trailer down the road. That's considered towing, right? My considered towing is if I can borrow my truck to my dad and have him hook on the gooseneck and go tow somewhere, it's a towable setup. But if I have to give a whole bunch of rules, don't do this, don't do that, it's not very towable. It's not very streetable.
I will take, if money's not an issue, I will take twins over single all day, every day, unless I'm trying to fit in some kind of a class. But twins are also a pretty big added expense versus most singles. So I understand that singles have their place from, they make power without having to completely break the pocketbook. But the other thing that I think sometimes we get caught up in is horsepower numbers. Like, I think if we could tune trucks on the dyno and just not ever have to tell anybody a horsepower number, and I think a 500 horsepower truck, or maybe I should say a 700 horsepower truck that has really good street manners and is really responsive is a lot more fun than a laggy 900 or 1,000 horsepower truck.
Yeah.
Just because you don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference. I mean, Tristan Dunlap's truck back in the day was a prime example. He had a 6.4 motor, which was 6.7 block, 5.9 crank, and he had just thrown a decent engine build together, billet rods, and then he had 250% overs, a 12 mil pump or a 14 mil pump, can't remember, and a 472 8710. Truck drove great. It was in a mega cab, and we put it on the dyno. We maxed it out at 1,034 horsepower, and he was happy with it. Well, drive it for a couple months, and you get the itch for more power, and he's like, I'm going to throw a 475 on it. You think you're going from a 472 to 475. It's not that big of a jump. But he went from an 87 turbine to a 96 turbine. And I think it was like a 115 T6 or something like that he swapped on there. And we did the swap, never even left the shop. We just put on the dyno, and we picked up exactly 100 horsepower. It was like 1132 versus 1034. It's 98 horsepower or something like that. So he was like, sweet, picked up 100 horsepower just swapping turbo. And he goes, takes it down the road, and he was out on a 15, 20-minute drive. And when he came back, he pulled it right back in the shop, and he's like, I'm pulling it back off. He's like, it's an extra 100 horsepower, but it's only fun when you floor it. I lost all my mid-range. He said the drivability that he lost was not worth the extra 100 horsepower that he gained for something that he drives every day. So if it's a race truck, horsepower's king. But if it's something that you're driving, drivability's king.
Yeah. That gives you kind of a rough rundown on turbos and air and stuff on some different setups. Engine failures. So rods is the first thing we see go.
Rods, heads. Heads is important because drop valve seats can happen even at a stock power level. If you're going to modify your diesel and you're going to keep it, it's a good idea to buy at least a reman head that has oversized high nickel content seats in it, better valve guides, thread in soft plugs under the hood.
It's one of the
valve cover.
One of those things that's not very fun,
right?
Because it doesn't feel like a performance advantage. But we have seen multiple times where you add that bigger injector, that bigger turbo, and now you're creating more heat.
Yep.
And your old loose valve seats are not happy with that extra heat, and you drop one, and now you're down an engine build, not just a head. So a head is definitely something to look into fairly early on in the game.
Right.
If
it's a good chance to put a fresh head gasket in it. Head, the HP remans we buy from D&J are $1,500 range, and you put that in with head studs. Now you got a good solid foundation to build on. You can put valve springs and push rods in it while you're at it. Now you've got to set up. Now your next weakest link is your stock connecting rods, and we've made 1,000 horsepower. We've made 1,300 horsepower on stock connecting rods, but they don't last.
It's really more about torque.
It is. But like Jim Rendon back in the day had a 475, made around 1,000 horsepower on stock connecting rods, and did it for 3 years on end. I mean, he beat the crap out of that truck, never broke it. But then we've had other trucks with set of compounds at 900 horsepower because it makes power down low, chuck a rod out the side of the block at 900 horsepower. So it's not really a horsepower number. It's what RPM curve you're making your power at, how heavy's your truck, a lightweight race truck that anytime it shifts and draws the RPMs down, it can accelerate the truck forward instead of just hunkering down the motor real hard. That will have less stress on your connecting rods. But I would generally say if your goal is 1,000 horsepower or more, plan on putting a set of billet rods in your engine.
Yeah. And then once you have rods in an engine, a girdle is always a great idea.
Yep.
We learned fairly early on that main caps move around a lot more than what we ever realized.
You make 1,800 foot-pounds of torque for a summer, 1,800 to 2,000 foot-pounds of torque for a summer, then pull your engine down, you pull your main caps off, and there's a lot of fretting between the main caps and the block, and that's where a girdle with 14-millimeter mains really helps keep everything together.
And that's going to increase bearing wear and that kind of stuff when that stuff's moving around.
You'll see the outside edges of the bearings get all shiny because the crank's walking around and everything's moving.
Yeah, and then, I mean, kind of from there, you're kind of getting into some pretty big boy stuff. We starting to see some block failures around that 11 to 1,200 horsepower range. It's a big variation. I mean,
I would say 1,300 horsepower is where you see them break more consistently. I have a lot of guys that come in on a stock motor making 1,200 horsepower, but guys that like Bainan, Matt Kaufman, Rick Fox, they all ran in the 1,250 to high 1,200 horsepower range, and they got about 50 to 80 passes out of their trucks until we had cracks in the bore. And that's when, if you know you want to make that power more, we recommend going to a sleeve setup, either sleeving it down to 4 1/8 bore or going to a deck plate setup.
So I'm going to say that for the most part covers street trucks, up to the crazy trucks. Let's talk new trucks a little bit. I get the phone call fairly regularly. I've got a new truck, a 4th gen or a 5th gen. I want to make power with it. Obviously, our lovely EPA friends make things like that really hard to do nowadays. What are some of the downfalls of that? What can you do to these trucks? Um, Talk about your 19 a little bit. Like, I always think that thing's a pretty good example of what you can do with a truck nowadays,
Right.
transmission wise, tuning wise, and that kind of stuff.
Well, my 19 is still has stock emissions. Everything's in place. Stock injectors. I did put I put ARP 625s in it, and I put a 63, 68 Taterbilt stock appearing on. Basically, he took my stock turbo and put bigger wheels in it. We did that 40,000 miles ago. It did 585 to the tire with emissions intact tuning, and it drives great. It's quiet. It's smooth. Does everything it's supposed to. It's a treat to tow a trailer with. But I can't remove the emission system because of the EPA regulations, and I wanted to be able to have a recipe that I could sell. But even now, I really can't sell too much, even emissions intact stuff. I don't have anything I can sell people because I don't have CARB EO certifications.
There is starting to be some of that available.
Yeah,
through...
I think PPEI and Calibrated are getting CARB EO certs on their tune files for emissions compliant stuff. And I know that's not what the general public wants to hear. Everybody wants to get that stupid emission system off their truck. But unfortunately, that is not the way of the future for us, because as long as the EPA has the Clean Air Act and enforces it the way it is, it's simply illegal, and we don't want to do illegal things in business. So I can't recommend you even doing that, because the dealer's not even going to want to trade your truck back in a couple years if you remove the emission system.
Right.
And the emission systems have gotten a lot better, and the aftermarket's coming in and supporting that, and we're trying to make the emission systems as low maintenance and high flow as possible, and still meeting emission standards. But I would recommend, from my perspective at this point in my life, I mean, when I was 18, I couldn't have said this, but having my 19 and using that to tow a faster race truck is a lot better setup than trying to buy a 2018 or 2019, buying a new truck and then trying to make it 1,000 horsepower. Because it's, in today's market, it's rough, because people can't legally sell you the tuning. They can't legally sell you an exhaust system that removes the DPF. It's hard to chase down parts, and if you end up going on black market and buying a tune that removes your emission system, and you put a big turbo on it, compound setup on it, now you're
killing your resale.
You've killed your resale. Can't trade it in, and if you have a problem with it, a lot of people can't support it. I mean, you're kind of on your own on that stuff, and it's unfortunate that's where we're at in this world. But if I drive my 19, I really get a lot less sad about it, because it drives really nice.
Well, and it's not what the hot rodder wants to hear, but the good thing about these new trucks is, I mean, they're coming off the lot with
400 horsepower,
a ton of horsepower.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to this whole thing of, forget about the horsepower number. I would rather tow with your 19 making 500 horsepower than I would with the quad cab making 1,200.
Right.
It's the 6-speed transmissions, the engine brake, the complete Cadillac of the whole package. It's just, they're awesome trucks. They tow great. So if you use these trucks for what they're meant to be, the OEs are building a pretty sweet truck anymore.
Right.
And if you got a hot rod and bug, go buy yourself an 06 or something.
Right.
And go hot rodding.
The new trucks, really, even the emissions compliant tuning, really helps getting rid of the throttle pedal lag.
Mm-hmm.
Makes the pedal responsive, and it gives you enough of a kick in the pants that you don't feel like you're just driving a turd around. And then I just save my quad cab for those rainy days, or those sunny days I need to go put a smile on my face.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to kind of wrap up that part of it. It really probably wrap us up mostly for today. Going into next week or the next couple of weeks, if you guys have any suggestions for topics you like to hear or people you'd like to hear from, always open to you guys' input. And every week rolls around mighty quick, and I run out of interesting ideas. So if you guys don't give me ideas or feedback, I might run out one of these times. I don't know, but I do have some ideas of people I'd like to talk to. So if you're the kind of person that thinks you have something to share and would like to talk with us for an episode, we'd be willing to hear that as well. So thanks for everybody that watches and listens, and we'll catch you guys on next week's episode of Firepunk Friday.